remember then, he started abusing me at the age of 4, and just shortly after that process, my mom sits my sister and I down, my mom and dad, and they tell us we have the talk. Right? So they have 2 versions of the talk. The first version is you're young and you're told not to sit on anyone's lap, not to be kissy with people, not to say hi to strangers. But Naki, that conversation happened to me after I was broken. The same happens with pain and brokenness. We adopt shame, and shame separates us from the truth of who we really are. And at the time, we were kind of cruising societally between the shame and the education around HIV. Right? So you were either the person who looked at it as a death sentence, and I don't want you to touch me, I will never share a cup. In this destination of healing that I'm healed. The problem is catching up to the belief that you are healed. I've struggled with catching up to that belief.
So it's good what you're saying, that you had to come to a point of realization and say, this truly is what has happened to me, because denial at times is what stops us from healing, because you are not being honest with yourself. You don't want to tell yourself that it's true, I was abused. It's true, it hurt me. It's true, I've been living a lie. And probably being resentful to yourself, to everybody around you, when truly God just wanted you to come to Him. Hello everybody, welcome to another amazing, beautiful, inspiring, thought-provoking podcast. This episode is going to be amazing. I always bring you incredible guests, but today I've got an extraordinary guest. I can't wait for you all to meet her. Her life story is amazing. Like, it's a profound lesson of resilience, transformation, and just you seeing how God works, in forgiveness and restoration, in growth, in just bringing healing to people's lives. I'm not going to share so much about what this episode is going to be about, but I've got with me a gorgeous wife, a lovely mother, an amazing friend, a beautiful lady, Lucy Balimba. Welcome, Lucy.
Thank you. Naki.
Hi.
Such a beautiful intro. I don't think I've ever been introduced like that in my entire life.
Really?
So this is new, and I'm happy. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, thank you for coming. I'm excited to have you. You look gorgeous. Your braids are amazing.
Thank you.
Please show them. Show them your braids.
My braids. Girl, I've got a person who does house calls,
Obviously.
Just call me. I'll charge you a 20% handling fee because I'm an entrepreneur and life works like that. But yeah, she's good.
No, you look amazing. I'm excited about this episode, by the way. I was going to tell the audience what it's about, but I say to myself, I'm not telling them, I'm not giving it away, but they have to stay tuned for them to know what it's going to be about. Sure. So to start with, though, how are you doing?
I'm good.
Are you good?
I did a check-in this morning, and I was talking to my husband, just before coming through. And I said to him, I'm feeling a little nervous, perhaps maybe a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful that he made me unpack it, right? And what I know about where I've been is that, girl, I can pitch to a Fortune 500 company, get a deal, get interrogated by a panel of 20 people about my value proposition, right? But get me to talk about myself.
It gets difficult.
So, and I think one of the biggest commitments I made to myself this year was to do something brave each month. And I know this feels like a simple moment, but it is so huge for me.
It is.
To honor a moment, to come and just speak about my heart. So that's how I'm feeling. I'm feeling a bit unsure, but I'm also feeling so excited because this is the moment of bravery. It's a moment of bravery for me. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It does. It does. So before we get into the episode, we're going to play a little game, this or that.
Sure.
To calm us down.
Sure.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Would you rather have a bad hair day or bad dye job?
Oh no, a bad day job.
Dye. Hair dye.
Look, I've had a really terrible experience with dyeing my hair, and look, bad hair day any day.
You'd rather have that? Yeah, I agree. I would have picked that as well. Yeah. Which are you likely to get, a speeding ticket or a parking ticket?
I am born again. So horrible time last year paying off
Yeah.
all my tickets. So I would rather have a parking ticket, guys. Parking ticket, you can negotiate, you can talk to people. But I think also what I'm learning about urgency and self-discipline, and
Yeah.
this is a point to your question, is that when you are late, it spills off onto other people. So
It
I never
does.
want the responsibility of making a fault on the road and having to deal with the consequences just because I was late. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's something I really had to speak to myself about because I'm generally up and about and here and there. So girl, parking ticket any day.
Anytime. I don't know. I think I'm always getting speeding tickets. I think I'm in F1 every time I'm driving.
Sure.
Are you an early bird or night owl?
I've just become an early bird. I'm so proud of myself.
Really?
Yeah.
Look at you, girl.
Girl, I'm week 2, 4 a.m., not even 5 a.m. club, 4 a.m. club. But it has been, again, a moment of bravery for me, right? Just kind of doing the things that sometimes you shelve all the way up on your shelf. Like in my kitchen shelf, I've got things that I probably haven't used, and I just like dust it and then put them back
Yeah,
on.
put it back.
And I've just challenged myself to pierce myself into those moments a lot more. I wake up at 4 to join my husband for gym, but it's just been so edifying. So early
Couple
bird,
goals.
girl, I've just
Couple
qualified.
goals.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
qualified.
No, I've just qualified.
I tried it. I tried for one day.
Yeah.
I know it's not me. I can work till midnight.
Yeah.
I can do things at night, even meetings, work meetings. I wish people could set meetings at night because I'm not productive in the morning.
Sure. But you see, that's work. You've had to do work in yourself to know when you are playing at your strengths, right? And that's beautiful because it's an edit. You're basically saying a very, very close friend of mine gyms at night. And it's because she understands what she needs in the morning. For me, 4 a.m. is not because I want to come onto a platform and tell people, no, girl, it's because I'm doing a brave thing. And I think seasons can be very iterative for all of us. You know what I mean? Yeah.
I hear you.
Yeah.
So now let's get into it. Are you ready?
I suppose I'm here now.
Okay, so I'm surprised
Yeah.
when you say it's hard for you to speak about yourself. Because the first time I ever heard you speak about yourself, you were so vulnerable to a crowd and you were so impactful at the same time.
Sure.
And I think when I was listening to you speak about your abuse story, I had so many mixed emotions.
Sure.
I was like, okay, this is so sad because this is someone whose life was literally robbed off by somebody else out of their own selfish adventure. But at the same time, I looked at it and I said, there is a testimony in every test. And now God wants to use your voice, right? So I'm just really excited to have you share your story with everybody. Just share what happened with who, when, and just, be as vulnerable as possible as well so that everybody else can learn.
Sure. I want to start with who I am.
Yeah.
So a few years ago, if I was on a platform like this and I was asked who I was, I would have said, my name is Lucy Balimba. I am a communications strategist. I have done a lot of award-winning work internationally, worked with JSE listed, FTSE listed companies, worked on signature deals. I've done some really incredible version 1 things in my life. And I say version 1 because I realized not too long ago, actually, I just had a revelation that I've cleaved onto. And that is to say, we have 2 versions of ourselves. So when I'm sitting with myself and I look at myself, I'm oscillating between the choice of choosing between the 2. So version 1 is that outside of the cup self, right? That is fixated on physical accomplishments, education, on bettering self, and on speaking the speak so that people can be able to make sense of who you are in relation to the world, power, impact. And all those things are great and they're honorable, right? They make us participate in society. They make us who we are, So I would say that. I would tell people that I have worked, one of the biggest signature deals I've worked on is worth more than $16 billion, right? So I've worked a lot to build this aspect of who I am, right? But you know who I am today? I am light.
Sure.
I'm a freedom fighter.
Love it.
I'm a mom. I'm a resourceful thinker. I'm a catalytic connector. I'm simple. I love peace. I love edifying, playing the role of an edifier and being edified in my relationships. I am in a space where I'm so much more concerned about cultivating my inner life. I think more closely about this moral logic that says, Lucy, how's your heart? How are you feeling? How can you help you? What is God saying about you? And for the longest time, that perspective of myself was cleaved and clasped into this mouthpiece of silence. I was forced to keep quiet. I was forced to not believe that I am important enough for God's gaze. I'm at a place this morning, I had a beautiful opportunity just to sit outside, and I was like, yeah, I can believe that. I'm a wonderful idea in God's mind. And but it wasn't like that in the beginning.
Yeah.
Right. So my story is that I was sexually abused from the age of 4, right up until I was 9, by a family member that my parents, took in. And I think, with just the nature of how Black families were structured, I think post-apartheid generally has one version. We think about economic emancipation, but we don't think about the fragility of the family fabric and how that became weakened. We don't think about the role and impact of abuse or fathers who are not present in our lives, etc. So this family member, had a really fractured family life, and my parents took both of them in. They were brothers, and these things started happening to me. But here's a moment that I want to speak about. So I remember then, he started abusing me at the age of 4, and just shortly after that process, my mom sits my sister and I down, my mom and dad, and they tell us about, we have the talk, right? So they have 2 versions of the talk. The first version is you're young and you're told not to sit on anyone's lap, not to be kissy with people, not to say hi to strangers. But Naki, that conversation happened to me after I was broken.
So it's sort of quite late as well.
Yeah. So it felt, how I want to create a parallel with it. The parallel that I want to create about that experience is the experience of, I have a Christian worldview, a biblical worldview, I'm a Christian, is the experience of the Garden of Eden. When Adam and Eve had, broken the rule and eaten the forbidden fruit. One of the first questions that God asked them was, where are you?
Yeah.
And not because God couldn't see them. I think the idea that God couldn't see them deletes God's omnipotence. He's all-seeing. So he could see them physically.
Yeah.
But there was a level of broken communion. They were not connected anymore because sin crept in. And I think the same happens with pain and brokenness. We adopt shame, and shame separates us from the truth of who we really are. So when my parents sat me down to tell me that this thing is wrong, unfortunately, I started believing that I was wrong. I had adopted and cleaved onto this false identity of the shame of what was happening to me. And just also qualifying this, for me, God creates, but the devil distorts. And I think I started moving away from this image, this beautiful idea of God in God's mind, this wholesome, healthy young girl with a ramp to grow. And I started believing the distorted and this broken aspect of what this man was telling me I was, what my pain was telling me I was, So I did. I married a false identity and the false belief and the lie that comes with being broken for many years. So it stopped at the age of 9, but already I stopped playing Mugosha. I don't know how to explain Mugosha in any other way. The stocking game, right? Where, two people will kind of hold poles on either side, and then you start jumping, and just anything that is just like free and frivolous.
Yeah.
I started to really imprison myself from a self-perception perspective, but also just feeling like if I jump high enough, people are going to see. I remember dreaming and fantasizing about underwear that has a lock, and I'd be 5 and praying to God vehemently.
And you're only 5 at that time.
Yeah, and just, God, if you could just create this, like, this,
But okay, maybe whilst you're still there, how did the conversation start? What was the initial conversation like? Did it I'm just wondering, at any point, did it feel normal to you? Because you know how in our society, like you're saying, there's a point where your parents then started sitting with you and speaking to you about sex, right? And growing up, it was such a taboo to speak about it. And it's even more disturbing to end up finding out about sex or having the knowledge from an aspect of abuse as well. So initially, when it started at 4, did it seem very normal to you, or did you feel like it was wrong still?
Sure. Oh, before the conversation even, right? It is such an interesting, you're taking me to a very interesting place, because the truth to that answer is something inside of me knew
it was wrong.
This was wrong. I didn't have to be told I'll be killed. I didn't have to be threatened to know that it felt like something broke inside of me.
Sure.
And I was submerged into this deep vault of shame. But I didn't have the emotional vocabulary to unpack it, to explain it, and to make myself feel like it's not my fault. So all of that just clubbed into this acceptance of I do shameful things because I allowed it to happen. And when my parents eventually spoke to us about it, it was from a position of fear. And I have the greatest compassion for them, because my parents, although these things happened, raised us so well, with the best intentions, with the best that they could do and the best that they knew. But it happened. Sin crept in, abuse crept in, pain crept in, I think it was a very, somebody said recently about just the geopolitical landscape in Africa, right?
Yeah.
It's coup season. There's a coup in this country, there's a coup here, whatever.
Yeah.
But at the time, it was almost like sexual abuse season. There was a time in the early 90s, I was born in 88, in the early 90s, where families were hearing about horrendous things, about murder, domestic abuse, rape. And I think now and then I'd overhear my parents and get terrified, kind of listening to these things.
Sure.
And I remember it was a knee-jerk reaction when they called us into that room to tell us about what we shouldn't allow to happen to us. But I was disempowered already, because I had already chosen to believe.
So did you at that point feel like you should share what's been happening to you?
No, I was even more terrified. And remember, I'm saying to you, God creates.
Yeah.
In our nature, God has created this pristine product. But the devil violates and he distorts. The Bible says he prowls around like a lion. And the one lion that I recognize in the Bible is the Lion of Judah. It describes Jesus in all his power. But it's amazing how the Bible then refers to the devil as something that is like a lion. So it's not the truth, but it is so similar to the truth that we're always at these junctures in our lives where we have to choose,
Yeah.
For me, truth is the absence of contradiction. And I was already living such a violated and contradictory life where I would go to church and would be told about freedom. I mean, Naki, I went to Sunday school, right? And typical Sunday school, it's that mural of Jesus and kids surrounding him. Call the little children to come to me. Girl, Jesus is a man. I was afraid on sitting on Jesus's lap. I was like, what is he going to do to me? And I think I want to take you there. And I want to take your listeners there as well to kind of speak about how abuse can fracture us. It can fracture our perspective. You know?
Yeah.
It can distort the truth. It can really violate our gaze when it comes to self, looking at yourself, but how you interpret certain things in the world, you know, and that happened to me.
I can imagine. I love what you just mentioned now, in the sense that it brings us back to what I was going to ask you as well, because obviously then this affected your relationship with God, how you view men, and it affected your whole dating experience. But maybe before I go to your dating experience as well, was it forceful, or did he, you know, like maybe you're a kid and he will lie to you about something, he'll tell you, okay, I'm going to buy this for you, or something like that? Was it like forceful, or how was it for you?
Sure. So there are elements of that that time in my life that I can't say I blocked, but I've kind of willfully reconciled to not get to. But what I know about the art of abuse is that it is compelling, it's persuasive. I had a love for sugar, you know things, you know. But also, abuse is an invitation. Sometimes it happens as an invitation. I think a lot of the times we think about abuse as a violent physical act.
Yeah, generally we would. Yeah.
But even when you are being emotionally violated,
especially at 4,
manipulated, it's not easy to see and interpret that as abuse, right?
True.
I think abuse is like so, and pain and anything that is just, that happens to us in that sense, right, outside of our will. It can be so sick, particularly when it is, and I'm not scaling abuse, right? But when it's a family member, because you've created a basis for trust. As a child, you don't know any better. If you're told that you're vegetarian, you will be vegetarian.
Yeah, you just go with what you're told.
Yeah, if your mother tells you that, no, actually you don't like pink, you like blue, you know.
You will take it.
Yeah, but also, I just want to talk about the importance of family as well, you know. My parents lived through a transition in our time, right? They lived inside apartheid and living into the transition of coming out of it. But when I think about that context and what that looked like for my family life, my mother had a retail job. She would come home at 8 in the evenings, tired, has to cook, no capacity because of just the nature of the system. And she came from a really poor background at home. So she's one of my greatest templates for excellence, for hard work, for resilience, you know. But that was it. That's the bit of my mom that we got, you know. But when we did get her, man, on weekends,
she was fully present.
She was there, you know. So she had to create reinforcements in the family structure to make sure that we are taken care of in certain ways.
Yeah.
And I think in that light, there were certain areas or blind spots that she couldn't look into because she just didn't have the capacity and the time. So this particular family member had almost sanitized his behavior from a perspective of being liked. A light bulb breaks and he fixes it.
Oh, I see. So he made himself useful.
Oh my goodness, he was a saint. And I think when you are a child and you are in the primacy of understanding right and wrong, and that getting taken away from you so early, I would look at him and he was a beacon and a shining example of what it means to have integrity. Because he would mop floors, he would take us out to parks, he would drive us, become an au pair. He was all of these amazing things, and he would get adorned and
what was the age difference
for it? You know, probably about 12 years. So he was a kid, but.
So he was, you mean he was 12?
Yeah, he was a kid, right? But in that context, as a 4-year-old, he was this towering figure of power. And again, back to that Garden of Eden story. Remember, God said, "Where are you?"
Yeah.
And then he said, you know, and then they spoke about how, you know, they're naked and they had to cover themselves. But then he said, who told you you were naked? I was told that I wasn't worthy. I was told many things and I believed them. And when I just look at 4-year-old me, I see those fig leaves that Adam and Eve used to cover themselves, and they shame. Because that's what happens when you interact with anything that is not God.
A lot of guilt, a lot of shame. Yeah.
Right? That's exactly what was happening with me, you know, where I had already believed what was said to me. And the process of unbelieving that became so difficult because I didn't have support. Remember, I didn't speak out.
No, you didn't.
I had this illogical sense of martyrdom where I had told myself, and maybe this was what I was told, that if I told anyone that he would be kicked off into the streets because my parents had literally adopted him as parents. And I just felt like, but he's supposed to be my brother, you know. I mean, we could take time to unpack a lot of these nuances around, you know, why people keep quiet during abuse, why they don't feel like the environment is conducive enough to speak.
Yeah.
But when abuse gets so intimately aligned with our identity, it is so hard to undo.
Yeah.
To unbelieve what you initially then adopt as a primary belief. So I was well and healthy to really just to just relate to the dark aspect of who I am, the girl with the secret. I knew I had a secret,
but you just couldn't share it.
I protected it because I knew how mad it would make my parents, you know, to speak, I suppose. And look, this is 4-year-old me, you know.
But did you ever at any point feel like your parents, because I know you mentioned your mom was busy and obviously she was trying to build a life for all of you, right? But there's also an aspect of, did you at any point feel rejected, or did you feel like maybe she could have been more present, or my parents could have noticed that this is what's happening to me?
Yeah.
Or there could have been signs as well, right? Because I think as kids, you start changing. You probably want to be alone most of the time. You don't want to speak about certain things. You don't want your mom to see you naked or things like that. Did you at any point feel they could have done better?
Absolutely. And you know, like I walked around with this inherited resentment towards my parents because truly, I mean, I'm a mom of 2. I'm raising children. The expectation that you have as a child of your parents, that they are all seeing, all covering, all loving. There are no flaws, there are no crevices. And while I was kind of just articulating my identity in this void of brokenness, I used to feel this entitlement towards my story, my secret.
Yeah.
And so there'd be times when I would just walk in a room and just feel like, if only she knew what happened to me, you know, she didn't protect me, you know. But also my sister and I took time to also unpack, because I have a younger sister, and one of my greatest fears, it was a retrospective fear. It wasn't a fear in the moment because we were powerless, right? Was always, I hope that didn't happen to her, you know. We eventually had to have a conversation, you know, and I'm not going to get into her story, right? Because this is about me today, and you know, but it's so interesting how I also borrowed resentment towards her. So there was a place inside of me that felt that if only they knew, they would treat me better. I was very hypersensitive to moments of rejection. So if you forgot my name off a list, or, you know, I just needed to always feel protected and reinforced. And I think as a parent, I am so aware of my shortcomings that one day my son and my daughter are going to be too, you know. But in this fragile state and stage of their lives, there's an almost complete expectation for me to be exactly what God would be to me as an adult. And so I was very aware of what I would say were my parents' shortcomings in terms of protecting me. And I certainly directed the pain and also just some of the reasons for not being protected to them. You know? And it's work that I've had to work through. I mean, Naki, you should have seen me in high school. Like, I was perfect. I was so perfect. I one day woke up and I decided, cool, let's redo you.
Yeah.
You have this big secret, you know, you don't want to be seen, you don't want people to know this about you. So the only thing to do is be perfect. And I want to pin that, right, to, I was 15 and we had, I think it's the Love Life Foundation. So they do a lot of sexual education, etc. Whenever they came to our high school. And they started telling us about, you know, sex, how babies are made, but also just like HIV, how it's contracted. And at the time, we were kind of cruising societally between the shame and the education around HIV, right? So you were either the person who looked at it as a death sentence and I don't want you to touch me, I will never share a cup, or, you know, a glass of water with, you know.
Yeah, that time it was very stigmatized.
Right?
Like people were really, they didn't have the knowledge.
Right. So there was that, like, you know, almost like a bubbling breakthrough in education around HIV, but also then the other side where there was a lot of shame and secrecy and silence around it. So then, you know, they told us how HIV gets contracted. I was like, that's it. I've got HIV. You know, I made that decision. I was like, oh,
so then you just assumed, it's not that you were sick or you were feeling sick or anything like that, just based on the conversation and what they spoke about, then you assumed that you also contracted it.
Yeah, and the thing that edified my assumptions was I was a sickly child, and I think when you look at it now, you start to understand that I was going through so many tumultuous moments inside of me, with no support, right?
Yeah.
So I didn't know that I had an allergy to penicillin. So I would get given penicillin every time I had a bronchopneumonia or a chest issue.
Oh, then you react.
So I'd have an allergic reaction, and I think generally a lot of women sometimes do have that, and it manifests in different ways. So I would get maybe you know, a rash on my lips, and that's it, shingles. You know,
because
I'm
then they're
educated,
mentioning
right,
all
about
the symptoms to you,
the symptoms, you know.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so I believed I had this thing. So I was at an intersection then in my life where I had to make a very brave choice to say, there's Nkosi Johnson, who was like the poster child on, you know, the youngest living person living with HIV, and he died at I think the age of 18. So I thought I had 3 more years to live. So I lived those years intensely. My relationships with my friends were deep. They were intuitive. I gave of myself because I was creating this obituary, right? I knew what the end would look like. It was going to end in shame, right? And I almost took the control upon myself, of the decision to control my life, to create this space that I could own and finally operate around my persona. Ask people who went to high school with me, not a strand, you would never see my hair, not a strand would be out of place, right?
Sure.
I would want to be a prefect or a head girl. My academics were clean, you know. I played in first team hockey from the time I was in grade 9, and all those things seem small, but as a little girl, those were the pressures, the self-inflicted pressures, so that made me feel better about carrying this life.
Yeah, it sort of made you. So you started looking for perfectionism and started making sure that you've got all these things under your name. You're doing well in sports, you're doing well academically, you know, and everyone is also, you're getting all the recognition and all that. And that in itself is making you feel better about yourself because you're already covered in shame. So you want something else to sort of put you in the spotlight as well.
Yeah. But can I tell you what that did to me? What it did to me is that it killed my ability to think of myself or to imagine myself in the long term. So when the rest of my peers were planning, you know, their varsity life, I mean, I was doing well academically, right? I didn't have the ability to think beyond my pain and my secret, because with every passing year, it got heavier. It got heavier thinking about my deathbed. And I remember my mom would always describe HIV as this thing like, yeah, you know, boys are bad. And And when you are sitting there and you're decaying and pooping on yourself, you know, that's sort of like fear-based
I think
kind
it's
of
how it
narrative.
was being spoken of back then, to be honest. I think even as kids, I think it's only when I became older, I started understanding what it really is about, because back then it's almost like you share a mug, you've gotten it. You know, it's almost like even by a handshake, you can contract it.
Naki.
It was really bad. And I'm glad now people really know what it's all
Right?
about. Yeah.
So here's the thing that then happened to me. I then went on to varsity, and what happened is that the rest of my life after turning 18 and I realized I wasn't dying, life then happened to me, so I could plan and see good things for myself, but there was always a limitation, you know. And then because I was becoming more aware of myself, I started realizing more and more that I wasn't perfect. But the thing about managing perfection is that perfection erodes your perspective. It kills it. You don't know how to think beyond the need to be fixated with fixing yourself and being perfect. And things like varsity and, you know, relationships, just relational moments with people that kind of cast a mirror on yourself were hard for me to digest. Because what do you mean I'm not perfect? What do you mean I cannot have control over X and X, you know? But one of the biggest then moments in my life that happened to me was just I'm struggling through this thing and I'm convinced I'm scared to go and have a test done. And a friend of mine who I actually met 2 days ago, shout out to Blue, said, fine, I'm picking you up. We're going to the labs and we're going to go do this test. I was like, what do you mean?
Like, are we really doing this?
What do you mean? You know, I already was working already in corporate at the time, and my life is a tapestry of grace, Naki. It really is. And we went to the labs, did the tests, got a call the next day to come and collect my test results, and I was ready. I was just ready to
to say, I mean,
the
I
truth,
knew
what
this.
I knew, right?
Yeah.
So I opened that envelope and I was just like, why are these people being so uncaring? Like,
You're supposed to sit me down.
The law is that you're supposed to sit me down and we're supposed to peel this envelope and you're supposed to counsel me. And, you know, I was like, is this how people with HIV get treated? And I'll speak about this thing around HIV because it's not even a stigmatization thing. I think it was a seminal moment in my life, right? When I opened that envelope and realized that I was HIV negative. I was stressed, not with relief, but with a lot of fear because suddenly I had to rebuild a life, a new life.
Yeah.
And I had cuddled and constructed my life around this lie that the wound became more comfortable for me than the truth.
True.
I didn't know how to live in freedom, in the freedom of knowing, you know, because all my life I had lived with the lie.
Yeah.
And I had given and fed the lie what it needed. But now cultivating a new reality based on the freedom of what is really the truth.
It's hard, and it's like you've been living a lie all this time, and you almost feel like you were robbed of joy, of peace, of happiness, of everything that you could have thought your future would be because you've been living in this lie, right? And now it's almost like you have to come head on with reality and look at how much time you probably have wasted wallowing, hurt, in pain, thinking this is who you are when it's actually not who you are, you know?
And you know,
So
Naki, it has really informed my healing journey. What you're saying right now, another thing that I have realized and adopted for myself, a new belief, is that God cannot heal what we don't acknowledge. So I was broken up until the time I was 23, when I was ready to face, do I have this or not? And that's when the healing started happening. And one of the biggest things I will encourage people who have gone through pain or abuse, who have gone through a moment in their lives where something happened to them, is to find a moment to acknowledge what has happened to you.
accept it.
Right?
Like, just be honest with yourself and say, okay, this has really happened. This is how it made me feel. This is where I'm at. And I think it's only from that aspect you realize, I think I was listening to Stephanie Ike the other time, and she was saying, God wants us as little kids. We don't have to go to him as adults and say, God, I've got all this figured out. But it's going to him as a little kid, bare as you are, and say, this is what has happened to me, but I'm not complete without God. And God, this is where I need you to come in, regardless of everything that I've gone through as well. So it's good what you're saying, that you had to come to a point of realization and say, this truly is what has happened to me, because denial at times is what stops us from healing, because you are not being honest with yourself. You don't want to tell yourself that it's true, I was abused. It's true, it hurt me. It's true, I've been living a lie. And probably being resentful to yourself, to everybody around you, when truly God just wanted you to come to him.
Come on,
you know?
Come on, right?
So it's amazing what you're saying. Yeah.
And also, what happens when you cleave onto a false identity, and just that process of kind of nurturing and feeding it, right?
Yeah.
It's a form of toxic rebellion. I really believe that in our genes and our nature, we were created to rebel against certain things. And I think that's why we see that throughout life, you know, or the lifespan of creation, there have been seminal moments of productive rebellion against stuff, against apartheid, against needing freedom, against the emancipation of women in the economy, against many things. So there is in us, God speaks of it as, maybe I would equate it to righteous anger. But when we decide to nurse and comfort a lie, it is a form of toxic rebellion. It's toxic to us. I then developed an autoimmune condition where I was just bleeding in the inside, you know, and things were happening in my body because pain goes somewhere. The thing about pain is loud, Naki. It demands to be heard. If you walked out of these studios and, you know, barefoot and bumped your toe, your neurological system, your brain is going to send messages. Yeah. You're going to forget about this beautiful, towering body that you have and everything else that you have. And you're going to focus on that one small toe because it just demands to be seen.
True.
You know? And I think the role of acknowledging what is wrong with us, when you know what is wrong and when you can call out the thing, looking at that doesn't scare you anymore. And that's where the power comes from. I think there's a difference between guilt and shame. I think in our conscience, God has built in an ability to feel guilty when you do something that violates the truth of who you are. And guilt is progressive. It's a good emotion because it challenges your convictions. But shame.
Yeah. I think shame is different because then shame stops you from even going before God. You feel unworthy, you feel dirty, and you just don't want to go before God. And I think shame is different.
But look at Adam.
I think it's very similar to guilt as well, though.
Sure.
The difference with guilt is you're blaming yourself, right? I think with shame, it's more like, yes, you might not have had control, but you just don't feel clothed enough to appear before God.
That is so deep, hey?
Yeah.
Come on. And I think also shame is an identity thing. It starts to bleed into our identity.
Yeah.
And then it limits our ability to move. It cripples us.
It does.
But guilt says, this was wrong. I'm going to get up and, you know, I think just the idea of repentance, just moving away and just turning around and continuing. So I'm at a place now, Naki, where I appreciate what happened to me.
Yeah. You know? So actually, because we drifted, you know, I wanted to ask you then, at what point did you gather courage to tell your family, if you did? Did you at any point?
I did.
Tell me about that.
I told them just after that, you know, I turned 23 moment and going and realizing I'm not HIV positive, right? Because I was so lost. Like I said to you, having to believe the truth after believing a lie for a really long time can feel new and lonely and mammoth. And I had also just really met my husband, you know, who didn't want anything from me, but he wanted God for me. I don't know how else to unpack that. When I met my husband, he made me feel like I was loved, not by him, but by God. And he almost like drew me back to God. The more I was just be besotted with this guy. He kept drawing me away from him and to God, drawing me away from him and to God, you know. And I think the more I became brave enough to be in God's presence as I am, the more I became brave enough to look at my shame and not own it. But I didn't know how to undo. So I went and I told my parents, you know. But there was also the part of me that was just like, ish, now you have to tell because guy looks like he wants to get married at some point, you know.
So you have to. So actually, because that's
you
sort
need
of
to fix your family issues.
Yeah,
you know?
have to. Yeah. So you told them,
and they were broken.
Yeah,
they were broken in different ways, but it broke them. Just kind of feeling helpless, feeling like, I mean, my mom created an environment where our friends were the ones who came to play at our house, you know. We didn't lack anything. We didn't need to go into the streets. I mean, we did do it, you know, before we moved into the suburbs, before freedom or emancipation in South Africa. But when we were living in township settings and that sort of thing, I mean, life was really free. You could just go and play in the streets as a child. Yeah. But my mom intentionally cultivated an environment that was conducive enough for us to want to be home. Yeah. So imagine, like, I'm stuck and I'm in the place of my pain, you know? And this person is just so elevated and sanitized, and I can't even speak against that. He's perfect. Yeah, but he's a figure of authority in my life, you know? So it broke them. It broke them. But it was also the beginning for me of understanding the role of support in helping you to be productive with pain. One of the wise people in my life, and I'm privileged that she's my counselor. She made this analogy about a 3-foot pot. You know, the ones that the cast iron ones that we cook with outside. Strong ones. Yeah. And he says, what happens in a moment of abuse, or what abuse does to us, it fractures us, right? Yeah. So perhaps you are still the pot, but you don't have 3 legs. So you're kind of out of kilter. You're slightly out of balance, right? And all you need is support, because your ability to function as a pot is still there. So you can still cook good food. You can still be burnt in wildfire and live, you know? But you just require enough support, and that could probably mean bricks to elevate you and keep you in balance, right? And I think speaking to my parents did that for me. It gave me a space that made me feel seen and encouraged me even more to move away from the shame that I had held on to. Yeah.
And I totally agree with what you're saying, because I think it's true when the Bible actually says the truth shall set you free, because it's in our lives that we do get deceived. You know, it's when we haven't said the truth that we are able to feel shameful, to feel guilt, to blame ourselves, and have all that unforgiveness even within us. The moment you put the truth out there, that's the time that that's the beginning of your healing journey as well. But I see we're running out of time. But I also wanted to know from your end, how did this entire journey impact your dating into your marriage, and even just how you now want to protect your kids, because this happened to you when you were 4, right? So how has it sort of impacted how you are bringing up your kids and how you trust people around your kids and all that?
Thank you for that question. And it's a hard one. It's hard because I continue to iterate in my journey of believing that I am healed. And I want to be specific about that, because it, again, is another revelation that I've adopted in my life, that generally there's this, kind of talk that healing is a journey. Yeah. I'm starting to believe that healing is a destination. It is a destination.
Tell me more about that.
It's a destination, Naki, because God speaks of it in past tense. He doesn't tell us that he will heal us. He tells us that we are healed. And he tells us how, by his stripes, that the ultimate sacrifice and the ultimate work was done for us, and that it is for us to be healed. And I say this specifically because I am finding in this journey, right, of articulating myself as a mom, as a wife, as a woman, as somebody who is a productive member of society, I am constantly oscillating between the lies that I thought and the truth of who God says I am. And a lot of the times in my own journey, or in this destination of healing that I'm in, I'm healed. The problem is catching up to the belief that you are healed.
Yeah.
I've struggled with catching up to that belief, right? Again, I said, truth is the absence of contradiction. There's only one truth. And God was so specific about it. He says he's the way, he's the truth, right? And he's the life.
Yeah.
And I find that when we are tardy about the truth, it doesn't have many versions, the truth, you know. We begin to feel that we're not healed, and we begin to feel that the process of healing, of believing that we are healed, is the healing, or it is a signal that, oh, this part is not necessarily washed well enough, you know, within us. So I believe that healing is a destination, and I say that, and I'm so deliberate about that, and I am unwavering about it, because if I didn't believe that, I'd be worried about my kids day in and day out. I'd be worried about who they interact with. I'd be worried, you know, about an uncle who walks through the door, a well-meaning uncle who walks through the door and decides to give my daughter a high five. And because I have moved completely from wanting to live in the strife that comes with protecting a lie, I have found so much freedom in believing God when he says it is done. Having that it is done perspective on life has turned around my ability to, I was saying the other day, like, guys, I'm 35. It's very recently that I've allowed myself to sit on God's lap and be his daughter. I was still afraid of sitting on God's lap, you know, because there was a broken ability to trust, because I still wanted a little bit of a piece that I could control in life, in my relationships. My husband will tell you that, you know, like, I hope he does. I hope he sees that I am iterating, you know. And one thing that we don't realize is that we think that pain defines us, but we don't realize how iterative purpose can be. When I was sexually abused, I was still meant to be the Lucy that I am today. The only thing is that what the impact of the abuse made me like shut my mouth into this mouthpiece of silence, you know. But God created me to speak, and he created me to have a story. He created me to have a way with words. And at the time, I adopted this image of timidity and brokenness and shyness and weakness. But the leitmotif of my life, the golden thread, the common point, is around speaking. It's just that when I believed my pain for what it told me I was, who told you? I believed that the self-image that came with it. Yeah. But when I have now decided to leap into the access and the freedom that I have in Christ, the more I believe that I have a voice, that I have a story, that, you know, and that has been the shift in my life, and how I parent, how I love, how I trust God with my kids, you know?
I hear you.
It hasn't been easy.
Yeah, I'm sure it's not an easy journey, especially after what you went through. But also, we've run out of time. I wish we could go. You know, we've got a lot that we wanted to unpack as well. But I think just to close out, just a quick advice you would give to somebody who is going through it, or a parent who could have a child who's going through it as well, just to close.
I want to thank you for that. I find that pain is a language, and it's something that happens to us. Let's face it, you know, one of the biggest things or this image in my mind is of us, and God says, you're a piece of fragile clay in my hands, and I'm the potter. It can hurt. It can be sore, high pressure. That pottery wheel, I mean, it operates at about more than 1,000 degrees Celsius and upwards, right? It's burning. You want to step out of it. You don't want it. I would advise you to acknowledge it. God cannot work with something that we don't acknowledge. Also, what we need to remember is that in the same way that Jesus went to go and resurrect Lazarus from the dead, he went there. And before he wept, he groaned. He looked at what sin was doing to the world, looked at everybody who was crying because of the loss of Lazarus, and he groaned. I want people to know that Jesus looks at our pain. He looks at the impact of abuse on our lives, and he groans because it affects him, it hurts him, it makes him bleed. But also, we serve a God, just like he said to the man who sat on the mat for 38 years, he didn't look at him and cancel him. He asked him and said, do you want to be well?
Yeah.
And we are going to have iterations of that in our lives. We're going to have a turn at being Jesus, who asks Naki, do you want to be well? Let me help you. Or we're going to be Naki, who admits to saying, I want to be well.
Yeah.
And I think we need to be awake to understanding how to create capacity in ourselves for people who are going through pain.
True. I totally agree. And I cannot add more. So on that note, we're going to say thank you so much, Lucy, for being an amazing guest. I've had an amazing time with you, and your story is certainly a testament of what God can do in people's lives. And definitely, I'm very sure there's a lot of people that are going to be impacted by this, because there are a lot of people that have gone through abuse. Some are struggling to heal, some have healed already, and I'm hoping to God that it doesn't happen to their kids as well, you know. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing so vulnerably, because it's a story that not many people want to share, and it's a true reality too. We don't look like what we've been through as well, because look at you, girl. So yeah, thank you so much for coming through. And everyone, thank you for listening. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment. And if you have any questions as well, please put them in the comment section and let us know who you want our next guest to be. Thanks for watching. Until next time.